It's tough for me to make this video not recommending the Emax Tinyhawk 2. Just like you, I've seen every video on YouTube about the Tinyhawk 2 and how great it is for beginners and how fun it is, how the frame is indestructible. Let's talk about some good things first before we get into why I do not recommend this. Emax as a whole, I like as a company. So they've paid attention to requests, demands, needs of their customers. So let's use the Tinyhawk 2 as an example, Tinyhawk 1 versus Tinyhawk 2. So Tinyhawk 1 did not have an adjustable camera angle. And so customers were saying, we wish it had an adjustable camera. So what did they do in Tinyhawk 2? Version 2, they gave us an adjustable camera. And then people talked about the milliwatt being capped at 100 milliwatts for the VTX, and they wished it was higher. So what did they do for version 2? They increased it to 200. People talked about the performance, and then what did they do? Instead of having plug-in motors, they had soldered motors. So they're paying attention. So Emax is paying attention to their customers, what they're requesting. So they do a good job of that. Next thing we'll talk about is the frame itself. So the frame really is indestructible. So I do not doubt that. This thing can hit concrete, it can hit the wall at whatever height, and it will be fine. So the only thing that I think possibly could break, which I've heard one instance of, is these little braces breaking. And I can imagine, because of how difficult it is to remove the propellers, that could happen. But compared to any other frame or just frames in general, just the material of this is malleable in a good way, so it does have some give. Again, I'm completely on board with this being an indestructible frame, literally. Like if you stepped on it, it would be fine, as far as the frame is concerned. So the issue I have with this, let's talk about my experience first. So I flew it just like everyone else, loved it like everyone else, and then when I had issues, I went on to Facebook groups, and unfortunately I did an informal survey. And unfortunately I found a lot of people had similar, pretty much eerily similar experiences. And that has to do with the board failing. And so I reached out to Emax, and without much troubleshooting, they basically said, the board has failed, you need a new board. So the board is $60. So granted, this product is $109. So the board is $60 plus tax plus shipping. So you're talking about $70-ish for a $109 product. So that is not an unusual circumstance as far as drones, quads are concerned. A lot of times the boards really are expensive. The gripe I have with this isn't so much the price difference between the board and the quad itself, because that's kind of innately true and characteristic of whoops in general. The issue I have with it is how often it happens. You'd be hard pressed to find anyone who's owned Tinyhawk 2 for more than 3 months who is not on their original board, or sorry, who is still on the original board because they fail so much. It's so common. It's so common that with all the great things that you love about it and that you remember flying, and then you're just enjoying it, and it's just awesome. It's just like what everyone says in the videos on YouTube, right? But when you start to have problems and you're trying to fix them, and you think it's maybe the motor, maybe there's some dirt in the motor, and so you take the motor apart and then you clean out anything that might be in between the magnets, and it still has problems. And then you replace it, and it still has problems. And you're like, okay, maybe my soldering job isn't good. And so you buy the plug-in style motor, and that doesn't work. And so you do everything you can to avoid having to pay $70 for a new board. And eventually you're at a point where, like I am, and this is not operable, where you're like, am I really going to spend $70 on a new board for a $109 product with the history and examples of other customers having the exact same issue over and over again? And so you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. Some people do. I've done informal surveys on both Facebook groups and Instagram of owners of Tinyhawk, as well as Tinyhawk Freestyle. to find out the issues that they've had and how common it is relative to my own experience. And so it is very, very common. So as much as owners love this while it works, when it doesn't, it's not good. And spending $70, especially for a newbie, on a product that costs $109, knowing that we may repeat that issue in the near future over and over again, we tend to go to another product. Okay. So to be fair, we're going to talk about also the Emax Tinyhawk Freestyle 2. Okay. So again, with each iteration, they respond to people's requests. So with this one, the original Tinyhawk Freestyle 1, people asked about how to, or they wish that they had more protection on the camera. And so the frame itself is designed such that it does protect the camera more. And so again, people asked, we wish it had higher milliwatt VTX. And so what did they do? They gave us higher milliwatt VTX. So the response is really good. And the design of the frame, it's pretty cool with the black fading to white. They could have made it all white, could have made it all black. So the design is good. I mean, aesthetically, it's amazing. Functionally, it's amazing. The board on this is not known to fail nearly as often, or it's not even a known issue. The known issue with the Tinyhawk Freestyle 2 in particular, and this is common, like over 90% of people who own this that I've informally surveyed on Instagram and Facebook have had prematurely failing VTXs. So a lot of people, vast majority of people who have owned this more than 2 or 3 months are on an aftermarket VTX, such as myself. Once that VTX is in, and I went with the TBS Unify Pro Nano, it's great. I mean, as a whole, even out of the box, with stock components, this gets 6-minute flight times on cruising style easily. And so that's great. And then the flying characteristics is great. It's just, if you're going to buy this, you're going to have to budget in a replacement VTX for certain. So $120 for this plus $20 to $30 for an aftermarket VTX, and you're looking at about $150. So when you're looking at $150, at that point you start considering other brands, other models of quads. But I'd still be okay with it, and I still am okay having bought this with the aftermarket VTX. I do wish that I knew that ahead of time, that it was an issue, because a lot of us, we fly these things, we watch YouTube videos and they're great, and then we're like, okay, let's get it, let's put our money down. And it's not until we get problems that we join Facebook groups and find out, how to resolve these issues or how common these issues are. So I do wish I joined it earlier to kind of know before, and then maybe I would not have gone with this product. But again, I did watch all the YouTube videos just like you guys, and it was great, and I admit it was great while it lasted, but they died prematurely, and the VTX on this died prematurely. So if you're okay with the VTX dying prematurely on this, and you realize you're going to be budgeting for a new one, then I still think this is good. I still think the Freestyle 2 is good. As for the Tinyhawk 2, being so common that the boards just fail is not a good thing. I think once Emax, if they decide to source out their electronics from another place, they're going to be unstoppable, because their innovation is great, their design is great, their intent is great. It's just all that greatness doesn't matter if you can't get this in the air. And so, unfortunately, for that reason, because of the reliability issue, I cannot recommend the Tinyhawk 2. And so that's it. I may be the first guy on YouTube to openly say that, and I know I'm not going to make a lot of friends saying that, but it's just something you should be aware of as you're watching videos and as you're contemplating or deciding whether or not to buy this product. That's it. See you next time. Bye. I forgot. There's a couple things I want to talk about. So earlier I talked about how difficult the propellers are to remove. And they're extremely difficult to remove the propellers. And the way I found to do it more easily is actually to remove the motor and use an automotive pry tool, plastic one, to remove the propeller. So it's not something I'm comfortable doing in the field. These are extremely hard to take off. There are YouTube videos after YouTube videos about how to do it because people are looking up how to remove the propellers off an Emax Tinyhawk too. I guess in ways it's a good thing that it doesn't come off because they're not going to fly off during flight. They're not going to fly off during a crash. But if and when they crack, you do need to replace it. And you're not going to be able to do it in the field easily. It is heart-wrenching to remove the propellers. Literally, your fingers will hurt. You will be cussing like crazy and wondering what you're doing wrong. And you're not doing anything wrong. It's just they're hard to take off. They're very, very hard to take off. So that's my other gripe about the Tinyhawk 2 is just the remove of the propellers is just so difficult, and it seems to be a very, very common experience that people have. So it's just the quality of it, not a good quality of the Emax Tinyhawk 2. The issues with the Freestyle, number one has to do with just how close, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but the motor wires are to the propellers. They are extremely close. So before I tape these down, out of the box, every time I would land, I would have to adjust it and just make sure that the wires are away from the propellers, because once those go out, you're going to have to do something to replace it. So just the proximity of the wires to the propellers, not so great. Another issue I had, which isn't necessarily common or isn't necessarily specific to this Freestyle, but the power cable off the connector did come off, and so it was just a matter of soldering it back on. It wasn't a big deal. So apart from that, I think it's fine. Oh, one major thing is one of my motors, when I lost the C-clip, the E-clip in there that holds the two pieces of the motor together. So I was trying to put one back in, a replacement, and I removed the motor from the frame, and in doing so, I snapped one of the wires off the motor. So my fault, completely my fault. However, I was surprised to learn how thin those wires are and how unprotected they are. So at least on my Tinyhawk Freestyle 2, these screws were on extremely tight. So I had a hard time removing those even with an electric screwdriver. So when I pulled those out, I wasn't holding onto the motor tight enough as I was doing it, and it snagged and it ripped off the wire off the motor. So again, that's my fault. But compared to other motors and other wires, it seems like with other companies, the connection between those three wires and the motor itself is a lot stronger. So if you are going to replace the motors, or when you replace the motors, if there's an issue, just be very careful that you're very, very delicate with the motor itself, or you're going to end up having to buy a replacement one like I did. They're not expensive. They're like $10, but unless you're buying other stuff, $10 plus shipping plus tax and all the wait time, you want to get this thing in the air as soon as you can. So just be very, very careful when you're replacing the motors or doing anything in this motor section. And that is it. All right, take care. Bye.